More than 70 million people died in just 6 years. Cities were erased. Nations collapsed. But how did one war become the deadliest in human history? World War II was not just a war. It was a global catastrophe. In this video, you will discover how the war started, why it became so deadly, and how it changed the world forever. Stay with me, because this story is more powerful than you think. How the war began. World War II did not begin in a single moment. It grew slowly from rising tensions across the world. After World War I, many countries were left weakened. Economies were unstable. People were frustrated and uncertain about the future. Peace had been declared, but the conditions beneath it were far from stable. Nations struggled to recover, and trust between countries remained fragile. In this environment, new leaders began to rise, leaders who promised strength, control, and national pride. One of the most significant was Adolf Hitler. Under his leadership, Germany did not remain passive. It began to expand aggressively. Territories were taken, agreements were challenged, and international warnings were often ignored. Each move increased tension across Europe. Other nations watched closely, but responses were slow and uncertain. At the same time, global instability continued to grow. Economic problems affected multiple regions. Political systems were under pressure, and cooperation between nations weakened. The world was becoming increasingly divided. Small conflicts and decisions began to connect. One action led to another, and the situation became more difficult to control. Eventually, these rising tensions reached a breaking point. What had been regional instability turned into a full-scale global conflict. Countries were drawn in, alliances formed, and within a short time, the situation expanded beyond borders. What began as tension became war, and what began as war became World War II. Scale of destruction. World War II was not limited to one region. It spread across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Fighting took place on land, at sea, and in the air. Multiple continents were pulled into the conflict, and no region remained untouched for long. As the war expanded, cities became major targets. Bombing campaigns increased in intensity. Airplanes flew over urban areas, dropping explosives from above. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed in a matter of hours. Buildings collapsed, roads were torn apart. Fires spread rapidly through crowded streets. For many civilians, danger came without warning. What once felt like safe homes turned into war zones. The destruction was not only visible in cities. Infrastructure across countries suffered massive damage. Railways were disrupted, bridges were destroyed, factories were damaged or completely wiped out. These were not just physical losses, they affected supply, communication, and daily life. Transportation slowed down, resources became harder to move. Recovery became more difficult with each passing day. World War II was not just fought on battlefields. It extended far beyond them. Civilians were directly affected. Cities became targets, and the impact of the war reached into everyday life. The scale of destruction was global, and its effects were felt everywhere. Human cost. Why it was the deadliest. World War II is remembered as the deadliest war in human history for one overwhelming reason: the scale of human loss. By the end of the conflict, more than 70 million people had lost their lives. This number includes both soldiers on the battlefield and civilians caught in the middle of destruction. But what makes this figure even more shocking is not just how high it is, but how many of those deaths were not soldiers at all. Civilian casualties were extremely high. Entire families were destroyed. Cities under bombardment meant that ordinary people, children, women, and the elderly, were often just as exposed to danger as soldiers on the front lines. For many, survival depended not on fighting ability, but on pure chance. Beyond the battlefield deaths, World War II also witnessed systematic violence on an unimaginable scale. One of the darkest examples of this were genocide and mass killings carried out during the war. Millions of innocent people were targeted not because of where they lived or what they did, but because of who they were. Among these atrocities was the Holocaust, one of the most devastating and tragic events in human history. It involved organized persecution and killing of millions of people under a structured system of oppression. This was not accidental destruction, it was deliberate, planned, and carried out over years. The human cost of World War II was not just about numbers. It was about lives interrupted, families destroyed, communities erased, and entire generations shaped by loss. Because in the end, what made World War II the deadliest war in history was not only how many died, but how deeply it affected humanity itself. Brutality of warfare. World War II introduced a level of brutality that the world had never experienced before. It was not just a conflict between armies on a battlefield. It became a total war, where entire nations were involved in the effort to fight, survive, and support the war machine. This meant that soldiers were not the only ones affected. Civilians, industries, cities, and even daily life became part of the conflict. Everything was connected to the war. One of the most terrifying aspects of this war was the use of air raids and firebombing. Cities were targeted from the sky with massive bombing campaigns. Buildings destroyed within seconds. Fires spread rapidly through crowded streets. For many people, there was little time to escape. For many, survival depended on being in the right place at the right moment. There were also fears surrounding chemical and biological threats. The possibility of weapons designed not just to destroy infrastructure, but to harm human life on a massive scale created constant fear and uncertainty. Even the idea of such weapons increased the psychological pressure of the war, making it even more terrifying for both soldiers and civilians. All of these elements combined to create a form of warfare that was far more intense and widespread than anything seen before. The battlefield was no longer limited to soldiers facing each other. It extended into cities, homes, and entire societies. This is why it is often said that the brutality of World War II was greater than any war before it. Because it was not just fought on the front lines, it was experienced everywhere. Nuclear weapons, a new level of destruction. As World War II reached its final stage, humanity entered a completely new era of warfare, one that introduced a level of destruction never seen before in history. This began with the development of atomic bombs. Scientists and governments were racing to unlock the power inside the atom itself. What started as scientific research soon turned into a military breakthrough that would change everything. The result was a weapon far more powerful than anything used before, a single bomb capable of destroying an entire city. That power was ultimately used in two locations, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When these bombs were dropped, The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Entire areas were destroyed within moments. Buildings vanished, infrastructure collapsed, and thousands of lives were lost almost instantly. This was not sudden destruction. It was sudden, absolute, and irreversible. The scale of destruction introduced a new reality to the world: instant mass destruction, where a single act could erase an entire city in seconds. The aftermath extended far beyond the initial explosion. Survivors faced long-term consequences, and the physical and emotional impact continued for years. These events marked a turning point in human history, because for the first time, humanity had created a weapon capable of destroying civilization on a massive scale. From this moment forward, warfare would never be the same again. Nuclear weapons changed not only how wars were fought, but also how wars were prevented. They introduced a new era where destruction could happen instantly and completely. Global impact. World War II was not confined to one region or one continent. It truly became a global conflict, affecting countries across the entire world. From Europe to Asia, from Africa to the Pacific Islands, no major region remained untouched. Nations that were directly involved faced destruction on their own soil, while even distant countries were impacted through trade disruption, political pressure, and economic instability. One of the most immediate effects of the war was the collapse of economies. Industries that once supported daily life were redirected toward military production. Trade routes were disrupted. Resources became scarce. Many countries faced severe financial instability as the war continued for years without pause. Even nations that were not directly on the battlefield felt the pressure through rising costs, shortages, and global uncertainty. At the same time, millions of people were displaced from their homes. Entire populations were forced to move due to bombing, invasion, or occupation. Families were separated, cities were abandoned, and communities were scattered across regions and borders. For many, returning home was no longer possible, as their homes had been destroyed or permanently changed. This widespread displacement, combined with global economic breakdown and continuous military conflict, made World War II the first truly worldwide war in human history. It was not limited to a specific battlefield or region. Instead, it connected nations, continents, and people in a single global crisis. In every sense, World War II reshaped the world simultaneously, politically, economically, and socially, and its impact was felt far beyond the years in which it was fought. Aftermath and consequences. When World War II finally ended, the fighting stopped, but the world did not return to normal. Instead, it entered a completely new phase in history. The war had destroyed old systems of power, and in their place, a new world order began to form. Countries that once dominated global politics were weakened, while others emerged stronger than ever before. Out of the ruins of war, two major powers rose to the top. These were the beginning of the rise of superpowers, nations that would go on to shape global politics, economy, and security for decades to come. The balance of power in the world had completely shifted. But peace was not fully achieved. Instead of another global war, a new kind of tension began to develop. This marked the beginning of the Cold War. It was not a direct battlefield conflict, but a long period of political, military, and ideological rivalry between major powers. The world was no longer united. It was divided into opposing blocs, each trying to expand its influence without open war. At the same time, the devastation of World War II made one thing clear to the world: such destruction must never happen again. As a result, efforts were made to create systems that could promote peace and cooperation between nations. This led to the formation of international organizations designed to maintain stability, encourage dialogue, and prevent future global conflicts. The aftermath of World War II was not just about rebuilding cities or economies, it was about rebuilding the entire structure of the world. A new political order, new global tensions, and new attempts to maintain peace in a changed and uncertain world. Emotional reflection. Beyond the battles, the strategies, and the global politics, World War II was, at its core, a deeply human tragedy. Its impact can best be understood not through maps or numbers, but through the lives it touched and the pain it left behind. Families destroyed. Across every region affected by the war, families were torn apart. Some lost loved ones on the battlefield. Others were separated during evacuations, bombings, or forced displacement. Parents lost children. Children grew up without parents. Entire family lines were erased in a matter of moments. Homes that once held warmth and safety became empty spaces filled with silence and loss. For many, the end of the war did not bring reunion because there was no one to return to. Survivors' trauma. Those who survived the war carried memories that never fully faded. Soldiers who returned from the front lines often carried experiences that were impossible to forget. Civilians who lived through bombings, invasion, and occupation carried their own silent suffering. Even after peace was declared, many survivors struggled to return to normal life. Everyday sounds, places, or moments could trigger painful memories of what they had lived through. Survival did not always mean peace. Long-term psychological impact. The effects of World War II did not end when the fighting stopped. They continued for years, even decades, shaping the emotional and psychological well-being of entire generations. Many people experienced fear, anxiety, and emotional scars that were not fully understood at the time. Communities had to rebuild not only their cities, but also their sense of safety and stability. The psychological impact of the war became a silent part of its legacy. World War II was not only a historical event, it was a human experience filled with loss, resilience, and deep emotional consequences that continued long after the war itself ended. Ending. When we look back at World War II, it is easy to focus on the numbers, the battles, and the history written in textbooks. But behind all of that lies a much deeper truth. This was not just a conflict between nations, it was a moment in history that tested the limits of humanity itself. World War II wasn't just the deadliest war in history, it was a warning to humanity. A warning about what happens when conflict escalates without control. A reminder of how quickly nations can fall into destruction. And a lesson about the cost of hatred, division, and unchecked power. It showed the world how fragile peace can be and how devastating war becomes when it reaches a global scale. Entire generations were shaped by its consequences, and its impact is still felt in the modern world today. But perhaps the most important question is not what happened in the past, it is what we have learned from it. And even more importantly, whether we have truly learned enough. And the question is, have we truly learned from it? Conclusion. World War II was not just the deadliest war in history, it was a turning point for humanity. It showed the dangers of power, hatred, and conflict,
and it forced the world to rethink how nations interact with each other. The lessons of this war are still relevant today, because history is not just something we study, it is something we must learn from. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others. And tell me in the comments what surprised you the most about World War II.